I think Microsoft did a study years ago and they found out that it took like 8 to 12 touches to close a deal, something like that. And most people, 80% of deals took 12, I think was the math. And most people quit after their third or fourth. And I think the danger of the 90 no's thing is that people think that they have to be irritating in order to be successful.
Well, I mean, to your point of like gamifying it, the guy called me 3 times because he was going to get 3 pleasant no's. So he figured out how to gamify it. Maybe if she'll pick up the phone 9 more times, I can get 9 from Marnie. She smiles a lot. That's a gamification right there.
Welcome, everybody. We are here for our expert panel on KPIs. I'm super excited to see everybody. I'm Scott Levy. We've got our panelists on board. We've got attendees, so we're going to jam. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then we're going to get to the questions. So just really briefly about why we're here. So the title you guys can all see on my screen. We'll just briefly go through what we're talking about here and why we're here. So we always start these calls, if you've been on one of our webinars with result maps, talking about the problem. And the problem is, if you look at the major growth targets that companies go through, only 1% really hit. Only 1% get from that first million annual revenue to the first 10. Less than 1% rather. Less than 1%, less than 0.1% actually make it to their first 50, which sucks. And a big reason behind that is we think of the game of business. And again, this slide probably looks familiar to a lot of you. But we think of the game of business like our company's over here, there's an end game over here, and it's super clear. We just need to get from one side to the other. And we imagine rainbows, unicorns, rocket ships, all kinds of good stuff. Because in our heads as leaders, the end game is really clear. But in fact, it's not so much what it's like. It's actually a little fuzzier for everybody we work with, and that introduces a lot of questions, introduces a lot of stress for leaders. One of the big things I hear from leaders who are coming to result maps all the time is like they feel like they can't get people to see the exact clear image, do the right things, and all that good stuff. So what happens is you get people going in different directions, right? Because we don't really all have that same image. That sucks. It stresses everybody out. It's what causes the strategy execution gap. It's what causes us to think of these things as herding cats. And that's what's responsible for the stat. So what we're talking about today is how we change the game a little bit and put up some guardrails to focus things. And the way we think of that is the guardrails are going to start to bring people back in toward the end game. And specifically, we typically talk about providing direction, then specific behaviors that will further narrow things in, then driving people forward with a clear mission. And once we do that, we can say, how are we going to keep score, which is our topic today. So having that in context, this is going to let companies make sense of things, lay out a strategy that makes sense for them, and then finally take action and execute. So that's the context. That's what we're here talking about today. We're really focusing on how we keep score, how we set KPIs. And I always like to include a translation table because this is really stuff that's independent of buzzwords. There are a lot of religious wars that go on about what's a key performance indicator or a measurable or a metric or a number. Let's just think in terms of numbers. But with that said, I'm super excited to talk with the group we have. This is a group of folks that I wouldn't hesitate to have set, KPIs in my organization. Everybody's got really great experience. We've got going from left to right here, and then we'll let everybody introduce themselves more. But Will Bunker's our first panelist. Will co-founded the largest dating site of the 90s, which became Match.com, who you've probably heard of. His company, One and Only, was bootstrapped from an original investment of $100K to an exit at $47.5 million to Ticketmaster in 1999. He then served as the president of the rebranded site Match.com. During that transition, when they transferred all the assets in to Dallas to be run by One and Only's team. After that, he became a co-founder of Critical Watch, an enterprise security company, which bootstrapped and sold to Alert Logic in 2015. He's an active investor, and he's in more than 150 startups, so he's got interesting perspectives there. Dr. Marnie Stockman, I have you next, picture-wise, CEO and co-founder of Lifecycle Insights, a company that helps managed service providers drive strategic conversations with their clients using metrics. Lifecycle Insights helps their customers drive business growth with a unique approach to metrics and visuals. And then Marnie's also got really interesting perspectives on customer experience and customer success. So really excited to have you here as well. John Humphrey is founder of Connect Points. He previously co-founded Paraveda Solutions, which has been on the Inc. 5000 multiple times. And he scaled a system that he's developed, which he calls Connect Points, which is a gamified tracking system that transforms even the most introverted technology consultants into sales and business development machines. I've seen this work multiple times from multiple companies. It's pretty crazy. And then we've got Zach Mobius. So Zach is founder of Duxata. He's worked at Uber, Amazon, even Lockheed Martin, where he discovered ways to align and motivate people using data. He developed unique insights while at Uber into how KPIs can motivate, drive long-term success. And that's super interesting because he didn't have a ton of control over the people. He really had to find ways to engage by showing people KPIs and helping them make sense of them, even if they didn't know the term. So now he's taken his insights to help nutrition coaches create the same type of success with their clients through the Duxata app. So thank you everybody for being here. How far in did that take? We got that done pretty quickly. Excellent. All you guys have sound, all you guys ready to go, and I'll start firing away with our KPI questions.
Absolutely.
So one of the big challenges I hear a lot from people is that KPIs get really complex. And I know for myself, I almost fall asleep by the time we get to the word indicator in KPIs. Why do you guys think we make this topic so hard and so difficult to make sense in the real world?
I think, well, I'll just start. Why we make it so difficult is because we try to make it perfect right out of the gate. And, we got to defeat the blank page, as I like to call it. So I think that's part of it is you could perseverate, one of my favorite words, forever to aim to get it perfect instead of iterating. And I'll let all of these folks who I should probably be learning from way more than talking tell me why I'm wrong.
But you got to tell us what perseverate means, because I had to look it up the first time you dropped that one on me.
Yeah, it means to just leave your mind weighing on something, just over, exhausting your mind on one particular topic. I'm really just stressing out over it, right?
Never done that myself.
No, I'm sure none of us have.
Well, I know I saw John chomping at the bits right there.
Well, I've worked with really intelligent introverts most of my career, and we tend to like to overcomplicate things because for the smart person, complicated is easier to do. It's simple is hard. I mean, to get something down to, the great composer David Belasco used to say, if you can't put your idea on the back of a business card, which we don't really have many of anymore, you don't have a clear idea. And so it's a lot harder to get your mission and vision and the things that you're trying to measure into a very simple formula. I think about the services business. If a CEO tells me his gross margin is 50% and his EBITDA is 25%, I don't need to know anything else. Right? It doesn't matter what his utilization is or his realization. And so it's like these two really simple metrics that say you're doing a really good job running the business. So I think it's hard to get down to what is the real thing. It's like Curly, the one thing, right?
And Zach, I saw you get ready to jump in there, so I want to make sure.
I think it's a mix of both. I think one of the big things that lends itself to complexity with KPIs is for a lot of businesses and a lot of people, they're very aspirational. Like when you go ahead and set KPIs, you're trying to set what am I going to track to hit this dream state? So you start to try to compile everything around where you're going and try to get as much data as possible to make yourself very sure of what you're doing. And I think the inverse is should be true for a lot of organizations is instead of trying to figure out all the stuff you want to measure, like John said, pick some stuff that you already know is going on and use that to drive feedback. And I think when you start to better understand your situation currently, it simplifies where you're trying to go and you can start to really hone in the things that matter within that.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, we've got an industrial engineer at the top of my little strip of people. I know you have thoughts on KPIs, Will, because we've talked about them so much, although we don't always call them KPIs.
I think it's hard because once you name a KPI, then everything else does that KPI doesn't get cover gets ignored. And so you have to be very careful, because if you give a simplistic KPI that doesn't really tie into the overall goal of the corporation, the individual will maximize the outcome of that number, even if it drives the ship, into the shore, because they hit their number. So it's a difficult balance to get a number that helps the whole organization, but measures the individual well.
Yeah, it makes sense. Awesome. The next question I've got, getting down to this, like, why is simple better? We've seen that there's this desire sometimes, because we can get lost. Was the word perseverating? We can build these complex structures of KPIs to try to cover everything, to try to cascade them down. Why does something simple, why is it better when you get it right to have that simple metric? Thoughts on that?
I think it comes down, I think Will hit it, right? So I remember back in the day, I was learning how to sell enterprise software and was having a killer year. And I got above my quota, and they jacked my accelerators like another 5%. And all of a sudden, I was now incented to sell $100,000 deals instead of $1 million deals. And I sold a lot of them, because every $100,000 deal I sold, I got 20 grand. And so I think you have to be really careful about malicious compliance. And the more complicated it is, the more we just, I think we're born to gamify things. I think I've never seen a comp plan that somebody didn't figure out a way around, or they didn't figure out how to maximize the benefit for themselves. And the more complicated it is, the more opportunity to do that. And so, getting it down to like the half a dozen things that are really important. Like I said earlier, I think it's difficult, and it sort of keeps the gamification off to the side.
Unlike any scientific experiment, the more variables you have, the more permutations you have of not being able to guess which one actually turns the dial, right? So if you have 6 different things you're aiming for, if it's only 2 of them, right, that you've made it over complex, and then the gamification again, like they're turning all of the widgets that we're not sure which one's actually working. So I always say brainstorm them all, and then start peeling them out and looking for overlap to really drive the one that's turning the dial.
Yeah, I think to kind of hit on what John and Marty are saying, that simple drives focus, and your attention and energy is going to go towards what you're tracking. So like Marty said, the more things you're tracking, the more split your focus is, the less percentage chance you are going to reach your goal. So if you focus on a few things, it's really easy to dial that in. That's why I always kind of go back to sporting analogies. It's like lifting weights or basketball is, I think, a really good one. You have a really tight feedback loop of did the ball go in the basket, yes or no? And based on that, you can correct your next shot. If you were trying to figure out did the ball go in the basket? Well, did that girl take a sip of the water fountain? Or what's the person behind me doing? It becomes very complex, and you've taken something that's very simple in nature and massively added massive layers of complexity, which takes away from your ability to do the thing well.
I mean, at the beginning of every week, we would go to the board, we'd get our management in there, and I would write most money divided by least work, because that's called efficiency. Because, every organization is limited by the inputs, and then can you drive the most benefit for those inputs? And then we would work our way back to what that meant for each team or each individual driving forward.
I love that. I've got a whiteboard that I pushed out of the way for the sake of this, but if I brought it back, that's going to be written on it tomorrow, just so you know.
Yeah. So that is a thread I want to pull on. What are some of the things you guys have done? Because I know we have a group of people where you've got products that do some of these things, or you're doing things internally. What are some of the most effective ways you've seen to keep things simple, to make them visual, where you get that level of clarity?
I feel like, I'm going to say red, yellow, green, right? We put stoplight reporting on everything that we do. It's interesting. So for those of you, I'm confident those of you on the call don't know what we do, but we build reporting for IT business owners to help sell to execs, not techs. And we often get folks saying, you clearly didn't come from this industry, because we like to complexify it, like may add a complexity to everything. And we've dialed it down to red, yellow, green. Oddly enough, the developers and I come from ed tech, where teachers are having to respond like this to test results with 30 children who could throw spitballs or other things at them, right, at any moment if they don't get it right. So yeah, I think one of the ways we've done it is to just dial it down to, is it at risk? Is it, a threat, or is it where we want it to be?
Yeah, definitely.
So my system, Connect Points, is essentially several inputs in 3 categories of connecting, marketing, and selling. And then we have a point associated with those activities, and then we measure it weekly. So you get a score. I did 40 points this week. I did 50 points this week. And, obviously in selling, one of the most important inputs is how many meetings you're having, right? So, so I know when somebody hits 40 to 50 points, they're probably doing 4 to 5 meetings a week, and it's roughly 10%, right? But the inputs don't correlate to percentages. I mean, there's no correlation between the 4 to 5 meetings and the 40 to 50 points if you're looking at the details. But I know the effort, if the effort is there and people are doing the work, they're going to get the benefit of having those meetings. And if you're in business development and you're doing 4 meetings a week, 16 to 20 a month, you're going to have pipeline. Either that or you're going to get fired. I mean, you're either doing the right, activity or you're not. So I think that's how I sort of boil it down. I mean, and I have people that get lost. Oh, well, is it more important to, pay it forward, or is it more important to post or comment on a blog or make an introduction? I don't care. Doesn't matter. Do the work, track it.
Yeah, I like that, because I think it's easy to overthink like which thing is going to amount to this much revenue, especially when you start looking at CRM software and all the pipeline projections. But the more of the touches and the work you're doing, the better it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken a very similar approach to Marnie in the stoplight red, yellow, green. A lot of my work is on how to translate metrics to drive compliance with fitness clients. So really doing 2 things. Like, one, how do you help coaches identify who are the clients that need the most work? When within those clients, what do they need to focus on? So we use the metrics and the stoplight approach in a sense of trying to identify the bottleneck week to week. Like, there's a lot of things you could look at in somebody's health, like how is their sleep, how is their digestion, how is their exercise, a whole litany of metrics that we capture. But what's the one thing you should really move the needle on? If you're not sleeping really well and that's lagging way behind everything else, like, how do we just focus on that this week? And then what you'll see in the data the next week is, like, in just bringing up the bottleneck, other things start to improve as well. So it's having a really clear way to capture within your metric set, what's the thing holding you behind, kind of using that theory of constraints model. And in unlocking that, you're able to unlock performance in other areas.
So
yeah, that makes total sense.
I approach it as, an entrepreneur, and you're trying to grow a company as fast as you can. And so, after we do the most money, least work, we would list all the projects. Then, we do the normal stuff, which is, how many resources, how expensive is it, how much time, then it would be, what do we think the payoff's going to be? And, everyone could kind of guess, well, that would be a 10% growth or 5% here. But then the other one that was most critical was how long before we got feedback. And what I found is if it took months before you found out if something was good or bad, that tended to lead to, chewing up a fourth of the year to find out that idea was terrible. And so we would begin to rescope it and always go, well, what is the scaled down version of this that we could do in a week or 2 that would give us initial feedback and make us feel good about putting more resources into it, or go, man, that's just the wrong direction. Let's pivot and do something else.
Yeah, that approach is super powerful. I was just talking with a CEO this morning, and that's his exact idea. Is like, always he comes back to take action, get a data point, learn, figure out. The farther out that feedback loop comes, the harder it is to adjust. I think what's interesting is going through this, it seems like everyone's kind of learned some things that work in the real world versus, in a B school, kind of here to go through these steps. How have you guys had to work to get to, say, figuring out the right number? I think that kind of hits on Will's idea. Like, what are some ways you've used to iterate through to figure out whether the number's right? Do we need to adjust it? And what are some of the learnings along the way?
I would say the key thing is you can't just create a KPI and then walk away. You, as the leader or manager, have to observe, is this really getting the results for the overall company? And if not, then we got to come up with a new number, because you don't know until you watch the behavior that KPI produces over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think fail fast, try different things and move on to the next thing. I think that's probably something I've learned. For me, it's like behavior modification. I'm trying to take an introverted person who is deeply technical and can do some really great technical things and teach them life skills for, being human. And, that takes time. And so I think you have a question that you talked about the interval, and everybody said, every week we do something. So, I try to look at the individual data for a person when I'm coaching them and figure out where that bottleneck is. Like, what is it you're afraid of? Like, why aren't you doing more of this over here?
So it also drives to the personality piece. I love that you take introverts, right, and help them succeed in the sales world. From the customer success side of the house, I found we were often handed KPIs around dollars, and client success folks are not coin operated the way sales folks are. So it was always interesting to find a way to tweak that. And it took a while. Like, I always felt like I was quarter staffing with the execs when I was running customer success. They're like, that is not going to work for these humans. These humans need a different metric that can tie directly to dollars, but they're aiming for some different things. So to use their personality traits, I think is important. And I've already written down, like, all right, I'm going to go Google stock Connect Points, because I'm fascinated by it.
And I think you have to pay attention to what's going on around you. So if you said, what metrics did I track 20 years ago? And what metrics am I tracking today? I mean, with the rise of social media and content and social selling, and the fact that Gartner says, 89% of buyers Google and search and find their solution provider, and then look at the LinkedIn. I mean, you don't show up and throw up anymore with a deck. They already know who you are when they call you for the first time.
Yep.
So it's a very different measurement process. You have to convince organizations that if they're not actively making their market-facing people famous, so that the market finds those people, not just the company, that they're going to have sales problems. I mean, and that is a really radical idea for like the average CEO of a growing, tech company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at in the real world application, like, to me, a KPI metric, whatever you want to call it, has to do one of two things. It either has to change behavior, and I look at that as micro and macro. So like micro, with the comp plan John talked about, like, does it change the behavior of the salesperson to where they're going after things that drive towards success of the business? And then macro, like, is the business focused on the right thing and measuring the right thing that is going to move them towards their long-term goal, which for most businesses is making more money, or if you run a high growth startup, like acquiring more users, so you can tell that story. And then I think secondly, it has to improve decision-making. Like, is this going to allow you to make higher quality decisions that are going to move yourself or the organization forward? If it doesn't do either of those two things, ideally both, then I think you have the wrong metric set, and you have to revisit that.
Yeah, super interesting. And to pull the thread on one of those other topics that came up there, Marnie, you were talking about a non-sales role, like KPIs for a non-sales role. What are some of the things that you guys have seen work when maybe somebody isn't frontline, they're not out there selling, or they're not directly touching customers? Have you seen different things work when you've translated or tried to figure out how to translate numbers? Like, I know Will and I have talked about just moving cards on a Kanban board before, just so many per day kind of idea.
I really want to start with what didn't work.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Where I've seen sort of, like a dollar amount or a percentage. So for customer success, say retention. So this is what I've seen not work. They globally projected like, okay, 95% retention rate. You weren't in charge of your own, right? It was just a team rate. And then they decided later that they were shutting down one of the products, and that was going to count against your numerator, but not your denominator in your retention rate. Like, okay, so you literally did not give me the control of any part of this. And then you mathematically eliminated the ability for me to reach a target. If you want a demoralizing activity,
Mhm.
don't give anyone control to move the needle. And this is when you can tell I was a high school math teacher again, because I'm shouting in meetings about numerators and denominators, but that doesn't feel fair to anybody.
Yeah.
And so that's a counterexample, but sometimes that helps to provide light on good ideas. Here's what's not to do.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the
instead of
idea.
everyone gets a trophy, it's everyone fails. I like it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Like we're all in this, morale is going to, but like the beatings will continue until morale improves type of situation.
It amazes me in large companies how a lot of the rank and file employees don't really understand the core fundamentals of how businesses work. And so I spent a lot of time when we hired a lot of young people out of engineering schools. And, we came up with this framework. I don't remember where it came from. We called it between the lines. And every problem, every issue, every solution had to do one of four things. It had to drive revenue, improve cost of goods sold, lower or increase net income, or manage risk. And we taught everybody in the firm, like, so which one of the four is that thing that you either want to do internally or the solution you want to provide for the client? If it doesn't do one of those four things, we're not taking their money. And I think that, as crazy as it sounds, starting there before you put employee retention in context, like why are we tracking customer retention? Which one of those metrics is it driving? It costs us, oh my gosh, it costs us $250 to acquire a new client. Easier to keep the ones we have. So trying to turn it into a language that the whole team understands, back to that, simplification thing again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you find that it sounds like you found it's enough to kind of lay out, these are our big picture metrics or our big picture needles we want to move? Make sure that you can make a case for them tying together, but it doesn't sound like you were connecting every dot for every KPI all the way down the organization. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, we had the big, the utilization, realization, gross margin by project. But I figured out early on, if I just priced the deal right, I'd get very little slippage, and I'd get at the end when I got my quarterly financial statements, I'd be right on target. And so it's trying to give control to people, but you got to teach them what the inputs are to get the outputs that you want, and have them focus.
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think
makes total sense.
Will kind of hit on this with like, how do you do something that mutually benefits the organization? And I think that's one of the biggest ones. I think the two examples that come to mind for me is like, one, working on a lot of projects within customer success, and Uber, where it is like really important for retention that you provide really good responsiveness, and you're doing so at a scale of millions of people per day. Where I saw that didn't go well was you just kind of got like number of tickets you had to process per day, but there was no kind of quality aspect to that. So like, I mean, you can, and everyone did this at some point in their Uber career, you just have hundreds of tickets to go through. So you're just kind of like ripping through and trying to do the most efficient thing. And I think like where that started to change was kind of doing an audit of like the process and kind of looking at like more the quality of the rep. So like, what is the rating they're getting? Like, was this problem actually solved? And like that starts to drive actual change within the business. It doesn't matter if I process 200 support tickets. If I'm just hitting like, okay, great, or sorry, can't help you, that's not going to create raving fans that are going to come back and want to be a part of the business.
What about some of the things you guys have seen in terms of motivating people with a number they can see move, where they get enough feedback to stay motivated, versus, a number where you can work and work and work, but it doesn't seem to move the needle of what matters? Have you guys found any specific insights on how to drill in and set numbers for people in a way that they don't feel overwhelmed, but they're pushed to stretch a little bit?
It probably depends on the business. I mean, we were fortunate in that we had, 1 million visitors a day. So you had very immediate feedback. So we created a money page, and it was how much revenue we were making per visitor. We would push out a change, and you would see it like bend up or bend down, depending on whether it was a good change or bad change. It's hard to get that feedback in a SaaS sales business, but if the closer you can get to it, the faster human behavior changes. That's just a built-in part of, feedback. So I think if you move it closer to when I do something and this happens, behavior changes faster. And so it's hard because a lot of those metrics are indirect. If to be fast, you won't know the real results till later. But if it's too far out, it's hard to get people to change.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, like, John, do you have any insights on there's a belief component to what you're tracking, right? You're saying we're going to go out and do these activities. We know sales will come from them. How quickly do people have to experience the success of those sales for it to be motivating and them to make the correlation? Like, okay, when I get these numbers up, dollars come in.
Pipeline in 90 days. Doesn't mean you're going to close business in your first 6 months, but you can go from zero to a really reasonable pipeline if you're consistently doing the right behavior. And, I think that where my coaching has fallen down is that I don't have a good mechanism for sort of the trend lines for people's behavior. I think if they, we get to the point where I can show them rolling averages or rates of change, they'll see like, oh my God, when I hit to 60 points and I was having 6 meetings, all of a sudden I went to a $3 million pipeline or a $5 million pipeline. So that's kind of where I'm at with Connect Points, is I'm trying to figure out the tracking mechanism so that I can deliver the pretty pictures that show people they're either doing it or they're not doing it. I mean, there's just nowhere to hide in this program. You're either doing enough of the work or you're not. And when you don't, you don't get pipe. There's no pipeline.
I like that
All
you
right.
said pretty pictures. Sorry, because I think that matters. Because I've certainly learned that not everybody reads data or reads it well. So
Right.
to be able to visualize it, I think is really important. So yeah, I'd be curious to see those visuals too.
So
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, Zach.
Go for it. I mean, I think on keeping people motivated, one of the big focuses I've like put with Dexata, and I took this from what we did at Uber with account management. It's having multiple ways to win. I think it's really easy to get focused on your just North Star metric, but like there could be a bit of a lag in like how that metric moves. So with health and fitness, like in all the data I've done on churn research, which was a ton because we had so much data at Uber, people churn because their perception of progress towards their goals is not aligned with where it wants to be. So if you don't feel like you're making progress, regardless if you are or not, your perception of that progress, you are going to go find another solution, another service. I think for coaches, it's going to be a client finding another coach. So it's how do you pull data to show that you're making progress in different areas? Even if for fitness clients, the big thing they care about is like the number on the scale is a really big metric. But if you can, if you can show them that like sleep is improving or hunger is improving or other metrics that like affect their lifestyle, you're kind of quantifying this objective. You can keep their interest focused on, okay, like I'm making progress this week. And if they're making progress week over week, eventually the metric they're going to care about like is going to change.
Yeah. So if I'm working for a company, the CEO, what he cares about is the coaching that I'm doing with his market-facing people generating revenue? Do they have skins on the wall? That's all they care about. I got to convince them that there's this 6 to 12 month process of maturing of data that he's not tracking and he doesn't understand. I mean, you said something to me years ago, Scott, when we were working at building a trading platform. You said, we ought to build the metrics while we're building the platform, because when the market changes and everybody goes from calling the call center to trading online, the executives won't believe you. And that was so true. I mean, I could bring up that dashboard and I could show the rolling averages of how, now, guess what? In 6 months, we've moved 75% of our volume online. And, and you guys have been around call centers. I mean, that's a huge deal, right? And so it's about understanding, your audience. And, for most of us, our audience is the CEO, the guy that writes the checks or the gal that writes the checks. And, you have to use data and pictures in order to sometimes convince them that, yes, we are making progress. And look what this guy did over the last 12 months or gal did. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what
it does. I mean, I think the visual component and being able to simplify them to communicate, at different levels of the organization, across the organization, that's really critical. I mean, that's something we certainly have found. And I just was talking with somebody about it on our teams this morning as well. Like, I so appreciate when somebody's done the work to assemble that for me. And I can see, okay, I don't have to dig into this. It's fine. Or, hey, there's a problem. Maybe I want to ask a question or take a peek at what's going on and kind of know when and where and how it makes sense versus the kind of vague stress of everything. Those are the questions I have. Is there anything you guys want to add? And if not, we'll just open this up to questions. And if we don't have questions, we'll wrap early.
Well, you talked about the timing for feedback. And I think what I heard from most people is kind of a weekly thing. Like if it goes beyond a week, then either you're not measuring the right thing or you're not giving the right feedback. And, so when I coach people, it has to be every single week. I do 30 minutes and sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 10, but they've got to, and we start with how many points did you have last week? What are you working on this week? It gets very boring, but that's the guys that succeed in life. I've just watched them. They do the very boring things over and over and over, year in, year out. So I'd be curious, Will, your perspective on that. You've invested in more companies than I've worked at.
Well, there's a great book called Don't Beat the Dog. And it's about training animals, but also, we're human beings. And so we respond to a lot of the same stimulus. And it's very much how soon you can give any feedback so that the person feels good about the activity, so that they keep doing it and want to do it. And it's hard, like I know with sales, you don't always get great feedback, like matter of fact, you get terrible feedback. It feels terrible. And so it's, how do you get to the right mind space? And I had to call hundreds and hundreds of websites trying to get them to carry our personals. And I would get to where I would frame it as, if I just had a right conversation or pre-qualified them. I now have new words for all that. But back then it was just like, can I find out something that tells me I need to follow up with these guys that they may buy from me eventually? But I think that's the difficult thing, that when you get it right, you see team members just really start to row so much harder. So it's magical.
It's funny that you say that, because last week I was at a conference and I was talking to a BDR that was running a booth for his company. And he said that one of his metrics was 90 no's. You had to get to 90 no's. And that was one thing every month he was expected to get to. And I thought, well, bully for you.
I'm writing that one down. I like that one.
But he makes it
a
positive. It's one more check, right, in the right direction. And it actually made me think. So I've done multiple webinars, as you have. And so you often sometimes get put on the email list. So Scott, if we're all going to get put on the email list, I had a BDR call me from a company that I'd done a webinar with. And I said, nope, if you go watch that webinar, like, I'm the face on there. So you don't have to call me again. But I was pleasant. So he called me every Friday, 3 weeks in a row. I was like, all right, you've gotten 3 pleasant no's for me. You may now take me off the list. If you call next time, I'm going to be salty. Like, I know how we got here. You now know I'm not a lead.
I'm going to be salty.
Now it's time. You gotten 3.
But, that's a great point. I think Microsoft did a study years ago, and they found out that it took like 8 to 12 touches to close a deal, something like that. And most people, 80% of deals took 12, I think was the math. And most people quit after their 3rd or 4th. And I think the danger of the 90 no's thing is that people think that they have to be irritating in order to be successful.
Well, I mean, to your point of like gamifying it, the guy called me 3 times because he was going to get 3 pleasant no's. So he figured out how to gamify it. Maybe if she'll pick up the phone 9 more times, I can get 9 from Marnie. She smiles a lot. That's a gamification right there.
So, it is interesting that the gamification, when we can talk about that, Scott, that's a really interesting, and Will's probably got a very interesting perspective given how the psychologists have been abusing us for 15 years, lots of research on how social media platforms are, doing real damage to people. But on the positive side, in the sales world, when you're tracking activity on a weekly basis, like we did this at Pariveda. We had this system, and it was a very easy portal, and the week would end on Sunday night at midnight. and my good friend Matt Rosen, he would wake up every Sunday morning and he would look at where he was relative to everybody else, and he would send out 50 emails and do his social media thing so that on Monday morning he won. And he eventually quit, started his company called Aleda. And, today they're very, very successful because he sort of set that he had that competitive spirit. So I think there is a lot to be said for, going back to the athletic metaphor where you look for people that like competition.
Quick thing I'll add here, Zach, so we did an interview with Matt that everybody can see on YouTube. They went, I think it was 3 years from 0 to 20 million.
Damn.
It's insane how fast. And it was just the hustle of getting out there. He's very much a go-giver. And he used those emails to drive that. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, Zach.
No, to kind of play off like what John and Will were saying, especially like the don't beat the dog, because there's a lot you can learn from training the dog. And I think the clicker is actually one of those. So one of the issues I see with like just weekly measuring is like there is like a longer cadence that you can do it. But if you figure that like all metrics that you care about are likely tied to a behavior that you are or not doing, the easiest thing you can do to change that behavior is just carry a clicker around with you or a note card. I blatantly stole this from like Dr. Trevor Cashy, who's brilliant in like taking the outcomes we want in nutrition and fitness and turning them behavioral. But if you start to turn this into like what behaviors are preventing me or pulling me closer to moving towards my goals, and how do I track that in a way that's super easy, you can start to take count of day to day the things you are or are not doing. And it gives you a much tighter feedback loop to see, okay, like what did I do today? How did I do today? And how do those two things align to where I want to actually go?
You know, what's super interesting to me, so it's actually Don't Shoot the Dog, which I know about because Will, you recommended it to me some years ago. The author, I think it's Karen Pryor, she invented the clicker method with dogs that I bet that your guy adopted.
She's brilliant.
Yeah. But it's a fantastic book. I highly
her great observation was, do you know why no one uses a negative reinforcement with dolphins? And it's because a 600-pound mammal just swims away.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that with people, you know, like human beings, most human beings, there's a big planet, they'll just leave if you're too aggressive or, you know, you're giving that negative feedback. They have other things to do with their lives.
Yeah, definitely. The other quote I like from that is she said something like, everyone should be required to train a chicken before they have kids, because chickens don't accept negative reinforcement. Like it just doesn't work. They're not wired to understand.
But you know, full circle, if you're going to track those metrics, they have to be easy, you know, which is why, you know, we've talked about me building a very simple mobile app that people can just say, I did one of these, I did two of those. Because if I got to go back to the portal, or I got to go to a spreadsheet, or I have to go to the CRM, and I got to, oh geez, Will's name's not in the CRM, so I can't say that I contacted him or I contacted him on social media. I mean, if it's not simple, you can't track it, and people will just not do it, especially business development people. Mm-hmm. You know, that's been the great lie about CRM is it doesn't help them. It helps managers beat them. And so, you know, I'm not a huge fan of that. But and then the other thing that makes it complicated is that the real rainmakers, like the naturals that we've all worked with, they don't know how to tell people what they did. They just get up every day and make shit happen. And they can't break it down to, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. And
that's
so
a really powerful observation. Yeah. I think that's really true. I used to experience that when I'd ask people, how are you doing this and that, when I was doing music or athletics or anything else. And it's become so automatic for people. They have automaticity, so they're not thinking about it.
Yeah, it's why the founders that I work with, they build these businesses and then they try to start building a sales force and they're firing people every 90 days because they don't understand why is it that you can't do what I've done. It seems so intuitive to me. Mm-hmm, it's not.
No doubt. Well, I know we are coming up on time. Want to see if anybody has questions. We'll keep talking, but if you guys want to put your questions in the chat, I'll pick them up. Any other topics that you guys want to throw in here? You guys being our panelists.
So I think John hit on something really interesting, and like you coming from a music background, how do you use metrics to help guide like more intuitive things? Because I mean, business is just as much art as it is science. And I think there's a lot of intuitive decisions you make day to day that you don't realize. So whether it's learning a new skill or improving that decision making, like what have you guys found to, I think, gamify or track, like if your intuition skills are improving over time?
I'm going to jump in on that while I have clarity, if you don't mind, John. So one of my favorite movies of all time is the original Karate Kid. And I always remember like wax on, wax off, wax on, because you're wondering what the heck's going to happen here. And in the movie, if you haven't seen it, You know, the old guy who's mentoring this young student. The student gets pissed off because he's been cleaning the cars and painting the fence. And he has this scene where he goes, okay, wax off. The kid does like this and intercepts a punch, and paint the fence. And he does this other move and blocks another punch. And I've always liked that idea of, okay, if I can just go find the right thing to do over and over and over, it will become automatic. I'll build the habit. So I don't know that I can tell you the one way to do it, but that's what I'm always looking for. What's that underlying movement? So in the example in the movie, there was a certain way of moving they were programming in. And it was a certain, you programming it in so much that you're no longer thinking about it. And you do that same thing on the basketball court, football field, pick your sport. That's my quick answer on that.
I always make a list of what skills do I need that would make this thing that I want to accomplish easier,
Mm-hmm.
and then try to build a weekly plan to get better at it. Whether it's, I want to be able to pitch ideas better and raise more money, and I watched 1,000 pitches, and you just start taking notes, and pretty soon you get really good, but to have an active plan for improvement, because if you've got an area of your life that's making it difficult to get what you want, what have you done this week to get better at that? And most people, the answer is nothing. And so, Tony Robbins would have this thing where he would say, people overestimate how much progress they can make in the short run, and they underestimate how much they can make in the long run. And so I try to make sure I have 4 to 5 hours a week that's focused on the long run.
For me, it's an intuition jump I've got to get people to make, which is you can't outgive your network. Like if you go do some of these activities over and over and over, the objective, right, is, Bob, I call it bob her down, right? Tell me more about that. If that's what you want a prospect to do, right? Tell me more about that. Could you come tell me more about that? And that's bob her down. Well, that comes from a lot of giving ideas away for free, being a general go-giver, as you said, or servant leader. I mean, if people will make that leap, imagine the really intelligent guy or gal that just gets out of law school. They were a poli-sci major. They loved English, so they went to law school. They get out and they start working 100 hours a week. And they realize that the guy who has his name on the building is somebody that goes and brings in the most business. And the only way they're going to get to be a partner in that firm is for them to adopt that behavior. How long? Nobody tells them that, right? It'd be a really great thing to learn in law school, that you have to like people and, all that stuff that you loved about English. You got to have other skills. And so, when I work with those kinds of folks, it's this first leap of faith, like, hey, you've got to do this. This isn't about a deal or your career. This is about your life. You have to do these behaviors in life because, a career path is not a linear process. It goes all over the place. And if you build it early in your career and becomes like muscle memory, then you'll never want for $1. And, I've been preaching this for 20 years and I'm still amazed at how many introverts never got the memo.
Yeah, I like that. And it brings up the point that, one, thank you, Marnie, for the recent book recommendation on the Go Giver. Will for the way back when on Don't Shoot the Dog. And John, there's like 3 or 4 books I can think of here that'll come to mind after we get off of this that you've recommended to me over the years.
Yeah, Adam Grant, Give and Take.
Yep.
Love is the Killer App. That's
haven't read that one yet.
Yeah, that's a really good one. There's so much evidence that being an all-around giver and a good person pays so many dividends, and you live a more fulfilled life when you're out helping people.
Well, with that one,
why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I see we're coming up on time. I'm going to throw one curveball. Is there a book that everyone wants to leave as their final recommendation? We didn't get any questions, but for anybody who's watching the replay, email me. I'll make sure we get the questions and we get you an answer. But book recommendations, anybody want to throw some out?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better operating manual for life than Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Great one.
Yep. I think if you were going to create like a personal OS, like that's kind of the bedrock for that.
I'd agree.
I'm wondering if you each tell yours, if as I look across to my bookshelf, I'm going to see all of them because I'm staring right at Extreme Ownership, which for the record is next to Go Giver and Raving. fans also. So I'll throw that one in there.
It was next to Go Giver, and which one?
Raving Fans.
Okay, I'm adding Raving Fans. I haven't read that one. John, you're just to the left, so I'm going to hit you if you've got one. Or
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go with Adam Grant, Give and Take. And I think that's a great book on the evidence of how you can be a genuine giver and do well.
right on. And now to the guy who could fund an entire moving company, or used to be able to before he went digital, with his books.
A great one is The Art of Learning.
Oh yeah, that is a great one.
And it's just about a guy and his way of giving himself brutal feedback and getting better at both chess playing and martial arts, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's a great book. Josh Waitzkin. Well, really, really enjoyed this. I hope everybody else has gotten half as much value as I've gotten out of it. Thank you all so much for being here. What are the best ways for people to connect with you? And we'll be sure to send out your links, but why don't you all go ahead and tell me? I'll start at that end. Marnie, what's the best way to find you?
Right. Thankfully, I was given the name Marnie Stockman, so there's just the one of me on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find.
Nice. John?
You can find me at John at Connect for Life. You can find me on LinkedIn, John Humphrey. And then I have a website where I put a lot of stuff, good content at connectforlife.com. We're about to be releasing Connect Points, theconnectpoints.com. So there's a primer that I've written out there, so you can get to the site and get a little 8-page summary on all the activities that we track.
Zach?
You can find me at Zach Mobius, ZachMobius on Instagram, or at Mobius, Mobius at Duxata, DUXATA.com.
Very good. Will, would you care to share ways, or do you want to be contacted?
Will Bunker. I dominate the search results. So you can read all my propaganda. Just type in my name.
Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day. And thanks everybody who joined us. Really appreciate you guys being here. And we look forward to seeing you on our next weekly webinar.